So when thinking about conservation, we often think about where it should be carried out, and we then rely on what are called the Lawton Principles. And I'm here with John Lawton to discuss those, discuss how they were created and how they've been used. And I'm here at the table where in 2010 we met myself and John and Graham Wynne from the RSPB and Pete Brotherton, and we hammered out those principles around this table. So good days and enjoyable days.
Hi, Bill.
So John, tell me why was there a need for these principles?
Well, way back in 2009, when the Labour government were in power, Hilary Benn, who was then the Secretary of State for Environment, took the warnings and comments that were coming out of places like Natural England and RSPB and the Wildlife Trust about the collapse of wildlife in England quite seriously. And Hilary asked me in 2009 to do a review of the science about why this was happening and then what we could do about it, how you would reverse the decline of nature. And so he appointed a committee. I, interestingly enough, had no say in who was on the committee. And we then met for nearly a year with Pete Brotherton from Natural England and another member of staff who acted as our secretariat. And we put together a report which is called Making Space for Nature. This is my copy, complete with scribbles all over it. Notice indecently that it is not a flashy modern publication. It's done with a ring binder, as you did in those days. And we produced a report in 2010 which brought together all the information that we thought was relevant from ecological science and made a number of recommendations about how we might reverse the decline of wildlife in England as it was, but of course anywhere it applies, throughout the United Kingdom, in fact anywhere in Europe, and is now being used widely all over the country and throughout Europe, summarised as what we need to do is more, bigger, better and joined wildlife habitats. We need more of them. We need bigger nature reserves. We need better managed reserves because lots of reserves are managed, and we need to join them up with corridors and stepping stones. And then we justified why that was the case with the science that was summarised in Making Space for Nature. More, bigger, better and joined has become a catchphrase now. Much more than that, it's become a way of thinking about conservation. It's enormously flattering to think that actually now, over 15 years since the report came out, people are saying more, bigger and better joined far more than they did initially when the report was first produced.
And it is, and that term was invented by Tom Tew, wasn't it?
Yes, it was called the Lawton Principles by Michael Gove when he was Secretary of State for the Environment. And he coined the term Lawton Principles. I chaired the committee of splendid people who got us to that point. And when we were finally discussing at the very end of one of our last meetings, I said that we need something that is succinct and even a minister could understand. Mm-hmm. I want a few words that even a minister could understand. And Tom Tew went all misty-eyed, and he didn't actually put it in that order. He said, a bit bigger, join, more and better, or something like that, which we then twisted because the alliteration was better as more, bigger, better and joined. And it was Tom who actually dreamed that up, not me.
And sometimes that's even called BBMJ to make it even shorter.
Yes, so the BBMJ, folks, summarises everything that's in there.
So it is kind of depressing thinking all that work and all that and all those words, and then it comes down to a handful of words. But that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, but the important thing to realise, Bill, is that there was no new science in this. Mm-hmm. Well, there was one little bit of new science, which was an index of how joined up habitats were, the connectedness of habitats. Mm-hmm. Everything else was taken from the science literature, all in peer-reviewed journals, where we knew what the data and the evidence based on ecological science said. And there are all kinds of reasons. People ask me frequently, what is it about this report that has lasted so long and had such an impact? And the honest answer is, I don't know, but I wish I could bottle it because I'd make an awful lot of money. But there are some hints. There are some hints. The group, several of the group wrote different parts of the report. And then I took 6 weeks out of my life and I rewrote the whole thing in plain English. I took out all the fancy terms like ecotones and called them messy edges. I took out all expressions of invertebrates and called them creepy crawlies, and so on. And so it was written to be as accessible as it could be, even though some of the ecological science is quite complicated. But it's not so complicated, you can't make it totally incomprehensible if you really try.
And I can remember I wrote a great chunk on the underlying science for landscape ecology, and used with best examples around the world, and you said, nope, have to come from England, which I think was a good call too.
They had to be pertinent examples from this country. So I think there was that, undoubtedly, I think made a difference. In fact, I know that Richard Benyon, who was the minister responsible for the report, back off a bit, John, because the report was commissioned by the Labour government. The Labour then lost the general election and the report was received by a new incoming Conservative government, of which Caroline Spelman was the new Secretary of State taking over from Hilary Benn, and the minister was Richard Benyon, who's now in the Lords, incidentally. And they picked up the report, and Richard told me not long after in a meeting with him that he got this report on a wet Sunday afternoon, and he sat down and he was going to look at it, and he was flicking through and he saw creepy crawlers and he thought, I haven't very many reports with creepy crawlers in it. And he read the whole thing because of that.
Because it was accessible.
Because it was accessible.
Fabulous. And it is, almost every week I hear of Lawton Principles, which I guess shows two things. It shows that they've really been important, and also what a sad life I have. But they are mentioned all the time. They really do underpin an awful lot of activity, don't they?
Yes, they do. I mean, it's very good. It's very humbling, actually, because if anybody had said to me 15 years ago that they would now be as important as they are, I simply wouldn't have believed them. I mean, there's another reason, actually, also, I think, why it took off. So many reports just, they never get read, but they sit on the minister's shelf and that's it. One is really because they as well as the language in it, there were a whole series of recommendations which were feasible for government to carry out. And also, there was a belief in those days from the Secretary of State for the Environment that these things mattered. And I think there's been a sea change now in government where they don't really matter to a lot of people. They're profoundly ill-informed, to be brutal.
Oh, okay. That's so. The hope is that this will be used more in the future, and there'll be a.
Well, I sincerely, we have been in the direction of travel since the report came out is remarkable. If you think, I mean, biodiversity net gain, the whole of the farming in endangered landscapes. I mean, you could produce a list as long as your arm, all of which were designed to produce more, bigger, better, and joined up habitats for nature. The present government seems to be backpedaling on that in all kinds of ill-informed ways. I mean, for example, to blame a failure to build houses or other infrastructure on great crested newts and bats is just profoundly ignorant of the science. There are all kinds of reasons why those houses are not being built, but it's got nothing to do with great crested newts, I can assure you.
So let's hope for more science-informed policy in the future.
Well, they've got it. It's very hard to get hold of, actually, now. I mean, the DEFRA website, I'm told, it's hard to find. I don't know whether, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you'd say that was on purpose, but I think it isn't. I just think it's a long time ago. But yes, I mean, because if you think about it, if you ignore, let's just trash the environment for short-term economic gain. That's exactly the same. We'll use an analogy which is usually helpful. That's like living in a house in the winter when you've run out of fuel and you decide the obvious source of fuel are the floorboards, which is great until you fall through the floor. And if we trash the environment, it will come back and bite us badly, economically and in terms of human well-being and human health.